Good morning. Sorry. Welcome to the lesson in which we are going to discuss strategy number 16 and the number 17. Strategy number 16 is about holding CEOs responsible for fraud and corruption whenever it happens in organizations. These are the people who should be held directly responsible for any incidences discovered in the organization. Strategy number 17. Sorry, that should be strategy number 17. Anti-fraud and corruption policy. We are going to discuss what is in this and how this policy can assist against fraud and corruption. I will start with strategy number 16. Sorry. This strategy is directly linked to the tone at the top. It is directly linked to the strategy on the tone at the top. We stated earlier that good leadership starts from the top and then it gives an example direction to all the managers from mid-level manager to low-level managers and even to the floor staff, to the lowest cadres of staff. If corruption is to be fought successfully, someone must be held to account for every fraud or corruption incident that is detected. What are the responsibilities of the CEO? The control of fraud and corruption must be the responsibility number one of any CEO. If fraud or corruption happens in an organization, the question should be, where was the CEO, not where were the auditors? Quite often, when fraud is discovered in organizations, you hear people and even senior managers asking, where were the auditors? This is not correct. The question should be, where were the CEO? The CEO and the board of directors, where were they? Because these are the people who are directly responsible for giving direction, the overall direction to the organization. The CEO must endeavor to ensure that all systems, policies, rules, procedures are proactively targeted at a minimization of financial malpractice in the organization or government. The following categories of people can assist the organization in ensuring the CEOs are really conscious of dealing with fraud and corruption on a daily basis, either directly or through others. The Audit Committee. The Audit Committee is the one that should hold the CEO directly responsible for any malpractices which have been discovered in the organization. The CFA Institute states that the primary purpose of a company's audit committee is to provide oversight of the financial reporting process, the audit process, the company's system of internal controls, and the compliance with laws and regulations. When we are talking about anti-fraud and corruption governance, the audit committee comes into sharp focus. In fact, the first and foremost important duty of the audit committee should be oversighting of the anti-fraud and corruption corporate governance system. Fraud and corruption costs organizations more than any other expense. When organizations go under and close business, it is usually due to massive fraud and corruption. Specific functions of the audit committee. The following are the functions in relation to fighting fraud or corruption. A. Oversight of the anti-fraud and corruption effort in the organization. B. Reviewing the recommendations of the anti-fraud and corruption department as far as fraud control is concerned. C. Oversight of the board of directors on their functions against fraud and corruption. D. Oversight of the board over the implementation of the recommendations of the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Council or Committee. The above constitutes the modern and proactive roles of the Audit Committee vis-a-vis fraud and corruption control. The Audit Committee that plays its roles well is in a good position to keep the board and by extension the CEO on its toes to ensure that fraud and corruption, including related vices, are controlled. Audit committee and the board of directors should not accept the executions from the CEO that he hired so and so, he relied so and so. He must be held personally liable since he or she is the captain of the organization. If something is going on, he or she is the person who must first get information and deal with it early enough. Reliance on other staff should not be an excuse for the CEO's incompetence. Stake or stockholders, the owners of or those who have interest in an organization, must check the actions of the people they employ to work in the organization on their behalf. They must not wait for the annual meetings, but proactively seek to understand what is transpiring in their organization on a daily basis. They can do this by keeping their ears open to what the general public is saying about the organization, and in particular, seek to understand and know the views of the suppliers and the customers of the organization. The CEO and indeed our managers must be made to understand that they are being watched by not only the stakeholders, but by the masses. I quote from Christopher Encom, 2019. Humans are naturally conscious of the power of the crowd, the masses, the population, the power of numbers. Once you build in your psyche that you are accountable to one person only, you automatically feel comfortable to build mechanisms to circumvent that person. Hence, building a crucible or a foundation for fraud and corruption. On the other hand, when you realize that there are several levels to report to report to, or that you are accountable to many people, the masses, the population, and then the incentive to misbehave diminishes. Internal audit. Organizations that are serious enough in combating fraud and corruption, including related vices, should modify the reporting lines of the internal audit function to make it more versatile and proactive in reporting wrongdoing in the organization. Internal auditors normally report to the audit committee functionally and the CEO or the board administratively. A third dimension of their reporting lines has to be added to make them more effective. They should also be reporting to the designated person representing the stake or stockholders directly. If this reporting is not formalized, then it should be actualized via audit lines so that the CEO and the audit committee can be held responsible and be investigated for any suspicious transactions or cover-ups of the internal audit findings and recommendations. During many years of my training delivery experience in many countries in Africa, internal auditors have sometimes expressed helplessness due to the fact that their report recommendations are not acted upon by the audit committee or CEO because presumably the loopholes highlighted are providing food for someone senior or some people. I usually dare them to report to the major shareholder secretary, or if the organization is owned by government, to report to the investigative agencies like the CID, that is criminal investigation departments of government, or anti-corruption bodies for the institution of independent investigations. Conclusion. Just as mentioned in the previous lessons, every corruption incident must first be directed to the management of the company, especially their CEO. Failure to hold the CEO accountable will lead to similar incidents happening in the future. And as mentioned earlier, if the CEO is found guilty, he must be prosecuted as any other person. This is to act as an example to anyone intending to do the same thing in the future. That is the end of my discussion on strategy number 16, holding CEOs responsible for fraud and corruption. I now move to the discussion on strategy number 17. Number 16 in this slide should be changed to read 17. Strategy number 17. Anti-corruption and fraud and corruption policy. Let me now discuss in detail what is in the 7th strategy. Anti-fraud and corruption policy. This is strategy number 17, as I've already said, and this should be corrected in your notes. Policies can be defined as a course or a principle of action adopted or proposed by an organization or individual In this lesson, we are going to look at policies that companies should adopt in their fight against fraud and corruption. And corruption risk management policy is a management document that is done by the board of directors via it is designated officials within or without the organization that outlines and it details the definitions of fraud and corruption, rules for avoiding fraud or corruption, procedures for instant response and the treatment of the violators of the policy, staff responsible for championing its implementation, to enable management achieve zero tolerance for fraud and corruption, and then save the organization from losses due to fraud. Fraud risk champion. This is a designated staff that looks for fraud danger signs and reports or takes corrective action. Fraud. Fraud is a criminal law terminology that refers to intentional deception made for personal gain or to damage another individual. Corruption is simply defined as abuse of positional power or privileges for personal gain. Risk appetite. This is the amount of risk that the organization is able to absorb without disrupting its operations. Risk register. This is the repository for all risks identified by the organization, and it is also referred to as risk log. Fraud risk insurance providers. These are the internal and external auditors that render opinion on the operations of anti-fraud policy. Chief Risk Officer. This is an executive that is charged with operationalization of the anti-fraud risk management policy. He enables the efficient and effective governance of significant risks. Risk management oversight. This refers to the Audit Committee and the Fraud Risk Management Executive Committee. Risk. The organization defines risk as the uncertainty of outcome, that an event will occur and adversely affect the achievement of objectives. The risk has to be assessed in respect of the combination of likelihood of something happening and the impact that arises if it actually does happen. Risk identification. The process of determining what might happen that could affect the objectives, why and how it might happen. Inherent risk refers to the status of the risk without taking account of any risk management activities that the organization may already have in place. Residual risk refers to the status of the risk after taking account of any risk measurement activities. Risk tolerance refers to the extent of violation relative to the achievement of an objective that an organization is prepared to accept. Risk management policy describes the organization's approach to managing risks and stipulates the standard in respect of risk tolerance. Risk will be measured in terms of impact and likelihood. Impact is the potential loss and uh, should the risk materialize. Likelihood is the probability that an adverse event which could cause materialization of the risk may occur. Risk owner. This refers to the person primarily responsible for coordinating a response to a particular risk. Strategic risks by nature impact on the achievement of the overall objectives of the organization rather than any discrete part of it. They cut across operational and divisional boundaries. This will be high level and strategic by nature. It is associated with a failure to meet our corporate objectives as set out in the corporate plan that cuts across programs and operational boundaries. Operational risks impact on the achievement of the objectives of any of the individual directorate, project, program, or sub-programs. These are associated with the delivery of routine activities, which would include but not be confined to specific projects centered on implementation. Program risk is associated with failing to deliver the objectives of the organization's business plan and the programs by not turning strategy into action. Steps in anti-fraud policy preparation. The following are the 5 major steps in policy preparation. Obtain board approval. Identification of the policy preparation consultant. Identification of the fraud risk champions. Determination of the risk appetite of the organization. Evaluation of the implementation capacity of the organization. Obtain board approval. Obtaining board approval ensures that they own the process since they are directly responsible for formulation and implementation of controls. The preparation of the document will consume the organization's resources and may even require the employment of extra staff. The policy will come with stiff penalties for all involved in running the organization. The fraud risk management policy is a management tool. Identification of the policy preparation consultant. You should utilize your internal consultants, but if they are lacking, then it is recommended that the policy preparation work is outsourced. This must be done in collaboration with a designated officer of the organization, who should be the internal audit manager or director. The preparation of this policy requires a mix of fraud control and investigative expertise. Consultants with anti-fraud and risk training comes in handy here. CVIPs, FCPS are the most suitable for this work. If the policy is formulated internally, it will still require the independent eyes of an external expert before it is approved for implementation. Identification of the fraud risk champions. Fraud risk champions are the necessary personnel in the operationalization of the anti-fraud risk management policy. In each department or section, there should be one fraud risk champion. The fraud risk champions assist the chief risk officer in the operationalization of the anti-fraud risk management policy. Fraud risk champions will be an enthusiastic and knowledgeable supporter of integrated risk management. The champion must be able to show how integrated risk management will help executives meet corporate objectives. Determination of the risk appetite of the organization. In determining the risk appetite of an organization, the following should be taken into account. Number one, the impact of the risk occurrence in the probability of the organization. The resources required to treat the risk against the impact. Number three, if the treatment costs more than outweighs the impact, then that risk is better absorbed or eaten by the organization. Training and awareness raising. It is important that staff across the authority are all trained in risk management issues and approaches. A program of training in this area will be developed. A program of training in this area will be developed where required to ensure that staff are kept up to date and are able to effectively implement risk management policy. The risk manager will be responsible for coordinating such suitable training. All staff must not only sign the commitment to implement the policy but also understand all of its contents. Risk management workbook. It should ensure that a risk management workbook for all activities from strategic to operational is available and gives staff guidance on risk appraisal, risk management, and the production of risk registers for all functions of the organization. As part of the register, the evaluation of the risk will be recorded together with the risk management actions taken and proposed. Search and seizure of computers and mobile phones. The policy must authorize the organization to break into and search offices and drawers of officers suspected of fraud or corruption. It has to empower the organization to also confiscate mobile and computers used by staff in the course of business. It can also authorize the organization to map or copy the storage devices of such equipments and carry out digital forensics on them. The expectation of privacy in offices and equipments provided by the organization should be removed by stating that such properties belong to the organization and therefore the organization has limitless access to them with or without consent of the user at any time or without notice whatsoever when need arises. Establishment of Anti-Fraud and Corruption Department. This policy should recommend the creation and establishment of the department that will deal with anti-fraud and corruption matters. The functions of these departments are outlined in the setting up of anti-fraud and corruption units as an independent strategy. If the organization is not able to run an independent department to deal with fraud and corruption, it is recommended that it creates an anti-fraud and corruption section within the internal audit department and then employ appropriately qualified and experienced staff to perform the special functions of implementing this policy. Setting thresholds for receiving gifts. This is very important so that all employees and even outsiders, suppliers and customers or clients may understand the limits. Without clear guidelines, no one will not receive a gift that is given, or no one will decline a gift that is given. The acceptance or rejection of gifts should be set against the earnings of the employees. A gift of, say, $100 to an employee who earns $100 per month can be too much and can even make him or her crazy. Such a gift, if given to a person that earns 10,000 USD a month, it will not have an impact on his thinking. It will look like a modest lunch. A gift of, say, 5,000 US dollars to a person that earns 10,000 US dollars will be too much and can influence the thinking of the receiver to the giver of the gift. Gifts can be considered a bribe if given before the signing of a contract, regardless of the amount involved. It is the total value of a gift that will always be considered, not necessarily cash. There must be thresholds as to what should be received as follows. Received and retained by an employee without declaring. Small gifts should be generally accepted and retained. Ordinarily, gifts that are around 1% of one's salary should be accepted and retained without declaration. Number 2, received, declared, and retained. Gifts that are considered significant but acceptable should be declared and retained by the receiver. Number 3, received, declared, and surrendered to the employer. Gifts that are considered too much but acceptable must be declared and surrendered to for the utilization committee discussed below. The gift should be accepted and simply forwarded to the designated officer of the organization or designated committee. We are going to discuss the utilization committee shortly, where the gifts received, declared, and surrendered will be forwarded to. Number 4, completely rejected. Gifts that are too much and also unethical must be politely rejected. They should not be accepted by employees. In extreme cases of bribery, the target employee should not only reject the gift, but also report the giver to management for blacklisting as a corrupt supplier or a contractor. Gifts surrendered to the utilization committee. This committee must be formed by the organization to receive, design, and supervise the utilization of the gifts received and surrendered to the organization. This committee should have at least 3 members. This committee should be reporting to the board of the organization. The committee may propose the following uses of the gifts: donations to charity. That is number one, donations to charity. They can choose charities for public interest, like assisting street children to get formal education. Number two, year-end party for all staff. They can spend this on staff's year-end party and also rewarding the champions of integrity. Number three, sponsorship for staff training on anti-fraud and corruption strategies. The amount can also be spent on sending nominated employees to workshops and conferences, and also sponsorship for professional anti-fraud and corruption training. Mandatory commitment to implement and follow the policy. Staff must sign a commitment statement to read and obey the fraud risk management policy. Failure to do that, the organization should take the stated action thereon. The action may be termination of services or summary dismissal. The staff will, however, have the right to appeal against the action to the appeal committee of the board. Conclusion. Companies should have a policy of zero tolerance of fraud and corruption, and they must require staff and volunteers at all times to act honestly and with integrity, and to safeguard the assets for which they are responsible. The naked truth is that fraud and corruption are ever-present threats to companies' assets and reputation, and so must be a concern of all members of staff and volunteers. They must take the most serious view of any actual attempted act of fraud and corruption by staff, volunteers, contractors, all their employees, implementing or consortium partners, and agents acting on their behalf. Staff and volunteers involved in actual or attempted fraud or corruption of any kind will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal, and where practical, will normally be reported to law enforcement authorities for criminal prosecution. Staff, management, and CEOs should endeavor to recover by any and all legal means any funds lost through fraud from those responsible, and will take robust action against involved third parties. This is the end of my discussion on strategy number 17, anti-fraud and corruption policy. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye. In almost 10 hours from now, I'll be coming online for another lesson on the remaining strategies. Strategy number 18, 19, and 20.